My whole body was trembling with fear. I fell to my knees in front of the Buddha statue and started desperately praying for help. Welcome. The following story is from an anonymous account on Reddit and has been shared around the internet ever since. The storyteller described a bizarre series of events that started in their childhood. My grandparents lived in Japan. My parents would take me there during the summer vacation and winter breaks from school to visit them. It was a small yet beautiful village where I really enjoyed every time I went. My grandparents loved to play with me and they had a big backyard. But the last time I was there was over 10 years ago. I never went there again. My parents booked a flight to Japan and we drove from the airport to my grandparents' home. When we arrived, my grandparents welcomed me with open arms. My parents wanted to have some time by themselves. So after a few days, they took a trip to another part of Japan, leaving me in the care of my grandma and grandpa. One day I was playing out in the backyard. My grandparents were inside the house. It was still cold and I was just about to get up. I heard a strange sound. It sounded like somebody was making the noise, over and over again in a deep masculine voice. I found a straw hat on the top of the tall hedges of the garden that enclosed the backyard. The hat moved sideways, and when it came to the cut in the fence, I saw a woman. Well, the hat was worn by her. That was when I realized who was making the sound. The woman was wearing a white dress, but the height of the hedge was about 8 feet. I was surprised at how tall the woman was. She could put her head over the hedge. The woman moved again and disappeared from sight. The frightening sound was slowly fading away into the distance. Bewildered, I got up and wandered back to the house. My grandparents were in the kitchen. I sat down at the table and, after a while, I told my grandparents what I had seen. I saw a tall woman just before. I wonder if a man was dressed as a woman. They weren't really paying attention to me. She was taller than the fence. No response. She was wearing a hat and she had a very strange voice, like pa, pa, pa. Grandma's eyes grew wide and she covered her mouth with her hand. Grandpa's face became serious and he grabbed me by the arm. When did you see her and where? He suddenly rushed out to the phone in the hallway and called someone. I couldn't hear what he was saying because the sliding door was closed. I looked over at Grandma and she was trembling. Grandpa finished the phone call and then came back into the room and spoke something to my grandmother. I've got to go out for a while, he said. You stay here with the child. Do not take your eyes off her for a second. What's going on, Grandpa? He looked at me with a sad expression in his eyes and said, You've been liked by Hachishakusama. He hurried outside and drove off. As we sat nervously in the kitchen waiting for my grandfather, my grandmother explained what was happening. She told me that there was a dangerous yokai that was haunting the area. They call it Hachishakusama. In Japanese it means 8 feet tall. As the name suggests, it has a height of about 8 feet, and it laughs in a strange way. The evil spirit preys on young children. Whoever 8 feet tall sees will die within a few days. It all sounded crazy to me. I wasn't sure what to believe. After that, my grandpa came back with an old woman. She introduced herself and asked me to follow her. She took me upstairs and brought me into my bedroom. The windows were covered in newspaper. There were small bowls with salt in all four corners of the room, and a small Buddha statue placed at the center of the room, on top of a wooden box. Then the woman sat me down on the bed and said, "Soon the sun will be setting, so listen carefully. You must stay in this room until tomorrow morning. You can't come out under any circumstances until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Your grandmother and your grandfather will not be speaking to you or call you until then. Remember, do not leave the room for any reason until then. I will let your parents know what is going on." They walked out into the hallway, and after saying goodbye to them, I closed the bedroom door and locked it. I turned on the TV and tried to watch, but I was so nervous. I felt sick to my stomach. Grandma had left some snacks for me, but I couldn't eat them. After some time, I finally fell asleep. When I woke up, it was just after 1 a.m. All of a sudden, I realized that something was tapping on the window. I felt the blood draining from my face and my heart skipped a beat. I desperately tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks on me, or maybe the branches of a tree. Eventually it stopped altogether, and that was when I heard my grandpa's voice. "Are you okay in there?" he asked. "If you are scared, you don't have to stay in there all alone. I can come inside and keep you company." I smiled and rushed over to open the door, but then I stopped in my tracks. I had goosebumps all over my body. It sounded like Grandpa's voice, but somehow it was different. I couldn't tell exactly what, but I just knew. "What are you doing?" Grandpa asked. "You can open the door now." I looked around inside the room. The salt in the bowls was slowly turning black. I backed away from the door. My whole body was trembling with fear. I fell to my knees in front of the Buddha statue and started desperately praying for help. Then I heard the voice outside the door saying, "Pa, pa, pa, pa." The tapping on the window started up again. I felt like the long night would never end, but eventually it was morning. The salt in all four bowls was discolored to pitch black. Just in case, I checked my watch. It was also showing 7:13. I cautiously opened the door. Grandma and the woman were standing outside waiting for me. When my grandma saw my face, she burst into tears and hugged me. After the incident, we drove straight to the airport and went home. My father told me that he had heard about 8 feet tall before. Years ago, his friend had been liked by her. The boy disappeared and was never seen again. My father said that there were other people who had been liked by her and lived to tell about it. They all had to leave Japan and settle down in foreign countries. They were never able to go back to their homeland. She always chooses children as her victims. Afterwards, I would call my grandparents every few weeks to talk to them on the phone. Over the years, I tried to convince myself that it was all just an urban legend, that everything that happened was just a prank. But sometimes I'm not so sure. My grandfather died 2 years ago. When he was sick, he wouldn't allow me to visit him, and he left strict instructions in his will that I wasn't to attend his funeral. It was all very sad. My grandmother called me a few days ago. She said that she had been diagnosed with cancer. She missed me terribly and wanted to see me one last time before she died. "Is it safe?" I asked. "It's been 10 years, she said. All that happened a long time ago. It's all forgotten. You're an adult now. I'm sure there won't be a problem. But what about Hachishakusama?" I said. For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the phone. Then I heard a deep, masculine voice saying,
Pa, 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 pa.